be here, like be on level playing surface with everyone else, whether it's a young player or an old player. Like invite young players to do things, get to know them, make them feel like you care about who they are, not for how many goals they could potentially score, but like where they come from, where their family is, do they have a girlfriend, like all those little things where fast forward 2 months when I need to have a difficult conversation, you know that it's because I care about you, not because I want something from you. I know how to lead you now. I know that kicking the ass doesn't work for this guy, so I gotta love him up a little bit and find out what's going on behind the scenes. I think those little things just take out some of that like internal dialogue of why aren't they responding to what I'm doing, or what's this guy thinking? Just ask him, just approach him, ask him, be approachable.
Welcome to the Beyond High Performance podcast, featuring content and conversations from me, Jason Jaggard, along with our elite coaches at Novus Global, their high-performing clients, and the faculty of the Meta Performance Institute for Coaching. On this podcast, you'll hear some of the world's best executive coaches and high-performing leaders, artists, and athletes discuss how they continue to go beyond high performance in their lives and businesses.
Welcome to this very special episode of Your Finest Hour. I'm Dan Leffelaar, Senior Partner and Director of Novus Global Sport. Today, we sit down with my client, Blake Wheeler, who recently played for the New York Rangers and captained the Winnipeg Jets in the NHL. He's joined by his former teammate and NHL captain, Andrew Ladd, who also happens to be an executive coach with Novus Global. In this episode, we talk about a whole bunch of things, from leadership to losing a captaincy to dealing with anxiety and performance. We dive into what it means to lead with courage, especially when things aren't going your way. If you're a leader or an athlete, this episode is a must listen. I hope you enjoy the show. This is probably the most excited I've been for an episode, recording an episode of the podcast, because of the people that we get to talk to today. So on today, we've got Blake Wheeler and Andrew Ladd, two gentlemen who have played in the NHL, combined more than 2,000 games, which is insane to say out loud. Both been captains in this league. And also played together and were captains of the same team. So there's so many places this conversation could go. But I just want to say, guys, I'm really pumped for this conversation, really excited to get a chance to talk leadership, sports, all those things together. So thanks for being here, both of you. Just by way of introduction, too, so everyone's aware, both of you have been clients of Novus Global. Andrew actually is now a coach with us and gone through that training process. So he's going to have an interesting take on a lot of these perspectives, both as a coach and an athlete. But first off, let me just ask this question. How are you guys doing right now? How the year started? What's occupying your time right now? And I'll kick it over to Andrew first. What's your year been like so far?
This is a busy time of year for me. So with coaching, obviously clients are starting, a lot of them are starting seasons. And then our foundation runs a program that is related to the hockey season as well for 10 to 12-year-old kids. So that's starting up right now. And then, we got 3 kids. So their school, their activities is all taken off too. So, lots going on, but all good stuff, all kind of related to actually this space and sports, which is what I love.
Yeah. But Blake, how's your year started off so far?
Yeah, busy. I mean, same. It's a lot of, I'm coaching as well, but just, I'm coaching, 3 young hockey teams. So, it's been fun. It's 3 different levels, age groups, sort of everything. So it's 3 different, completely different experiences. And the days are nice because my wife Sam and I get to kind of catch up on lost time from the last 20-ish years. And and then at nighttime it's we're ships in the night, just going separate directions, getting everyone where they need to go. But it's been a lot of fun. I mean, it's nice to enjoy this time of year. This is kind of my favorite time of year, where that weather is still warm enough to play golf, but it's not scalding hot. So I love this time of year. So it's been a great couple months.
Yeah, no, it's I just realized we're all in the three kids club too. So there's a lot of that going on. I want to jump right in. I want to jump in the deep end right off the bat, and hear about a couple things. So one thing is you guys played together, and Blake, you followed Ladder as a leader. And so just for context, the team was in Atlanta. Andrew was named the captain when he got there. Then the team moved up to Winnipeg, and Blake, you arrived in Atlanta and then did that move as well. So first off, being a young player, what was it? This is probably a more vulnerable question, but being a young player, what was it like being led by Andrew lad as a captain, and this is your chance to just air all the dirty laundry all you want.
I will say, while you gave me that opportunity to air out the dirty laundry, there's no dirty laundry, but what was interesting, because I started my career in Boston, and Boston was like a very professional organization. I came into the league like on the road, you're wearing a suit everywhere. You have to wear, winter jacket over top your suit coat. Like, it's like, I remember, when I wore a polo shirt on the plane the first time, and I hadn't quite earned the right to do that yet. And some of the older guys were like, what are you doing? Fast forward to getting traded to Atlanta, and it was a very different experience. The captain in Boston was Zdeno Chara, and he was very serious and approached the game very seriously, and not to say that Ladder didn't, but I just remember getting there and we're on the road and Ladder's got a backwards White Sox hat on and jeans and stuff, and it was just a different experience. So outside of just what you wore on the road, being led by Ladder was he did it really well. I mean, the challenge would be that we're virtually the same age, and at that time, young in the same age, and he was given the responsibility to kind of lead, guys like myself who were kind of the same age, guys who were older than him. I thought he handled himself incredibly well, especially going through that transition of moving to a new city, all kind of the little things that go into okay, where's everyone going to live? Well, he went up early and kind of, paved some highway for all the players to when we get to Winnipeg, what can we expect? Here's some resources, here's some different things. So, in that transition from Atlanta to Winnipeg, he was the guy who, gave everyone sort of a path to follow.
Was it the backwards hat or was it the White Sox hat, the 3F?
I mean, the hat, period.
It was just hat.
Yeah, the hat was wild to me. But I mean, you looked great. It just it just didn't look like we were an NHL team on the road. I think now that would be you would have looked like you fit in perfectly now, but 15 years ago it was a little bit different.
He was a trendsetter.
Yeah, he was ahead of his time. That's what we'll say. I like that.
So, well, and actually you bring up a really interesting point. So you're coming from Boston. Andrew just won a cup in Chicago. So you're coming from two, you guys were both exposed to really good teams or being on good teams early on, and both in Carolina for Andrew and then Chicago. And I'm curious, Andrew, you being the first captain of the Jets when it came back, was there a lot of that? What did you see from other teams that you wanted to bring in? And then Blake, you were probably answering the same question in your own head, but you weren't the captain yet. So Andrew, to you first, what was that experience? What were the things that you were kind of collecting in your head? And then what did you realize when you started leading?
What I learned in my first 6 years in the NHL at that point was really the professionalism and I guess not with my dress code, but professionalism, with, hey, how do you show up? How do you prepare? How do you compete day in, day out? How do you practice? So I think that was natural to me, and that's what I leaned on. And then the interesting thing going into Winnipeg was hey, you're going to a brand new franchise that had never been in the NHL. So there was a lot of hey, organizationally, what did you do in Chicago when you won? Organizationally, what did you do in Carolina when you won? So trying to just help them from that standpoint understand the standards that we had set in those different places, the different ways that maybe we were treated as players, in terms of food and what was available for us to recover and all the things that it took to prepare yourself to practice the next day or to play the next night.
And Blake, as you're watching Ladder lead, did you think that you were going to become the next captain? Was that in your head ever?
No, not certainly not for a long time. When I got traded to Atlanta, and when we moved to Winnipeg, kind of that whole first time, my mindset was it was an opportunity that I had wanted, in Boston, that it was just like, that was a championship level team. And, I was coming in and I was just grateful like for the opportunity I got in Boston to play in the NHL. And then, there wasn't maybe necessarily like the growth available there. So when I got traded, it was like, okay, this is an opportunity for me to kind of do the things I wanted to do. So that was my mindset, was like, I need to perform. I need to like take advantage of this opportunity. Ladder was handling the leadership. I was, like I said, I was just so focused on like, I need to capitalize on this opportunity and be, like make the most of this opportunity I've been given. Like that was my mindset. And then as we progressed, like the answer is yes. I felt myself becoming a leader on the team and a leader in the room. My hope was that Ladder was always going to be the captain. Like that was my hope, was that he was going to stay there and I could kind of continue leading how I was leading and helping him. But like, never was I like, hoping that he was gone so I could be the captain. Like it was never that.
I think there's a couple things that come up for me. Like one is there's a ton of, we have the privilege in our team of working with so many captains, even in the NHL. Like there's at least 4 or 5 that we're working with directly right now. And one of the things that I've noticed about that job is it seems, and this is not just a sports thing, it seems to be a life thing. Like leadership can be very lonely, and can be very isolating. And so I am curious about your guys' was it that way for you guys? In the various leadership positions you've been in the NHL? Maybe it wasn't, but I am curious, like when I say that, what kind of reaction comes up in your head?
I think it can be, but I think a lot of times it's self-imposed loneliness. When I think about the 2 teams that I did win with, it's like you try to name, there's obviously people leading the charge, but I could name 8 to 10 people that I would consider leaders or potential captains of a team that were part of those teams. So it really was leadership by committee.
How does a team get to that place?
Well, I think I look back now, two different captains. So my first captain I had was 38 years old. He was, had had a long, successful career. And so that was Rod Brindamore, and just led in different ways. And my sense of him was like he allowed everybody around him and invited everybody around him into leadership. Allowed everyone to be themselves. He wasn't always the person that spoke up. He really he said something when it needed to be said, but he also sat back and let other people take charge. And then, the second captain I had was 19 years old. And so he was super young, a phenom coming into the league, and that was Jonathan Taves. So that was a different experience because you had people around them that understood like, hey, he's young. He actually doesn't know shit. There was raw leadership ability, but yeah, to your point, like he didn't know a whole lot. Like he was, so there was already, I think there was an understanding like, hey, like we need to help this guy in leadership. And again, it became like everyone just kind of stepping up in different moments. And I think at that point, Johnny was like, hey, he knew he was young and he was raw. And it was like, hey, he was very hungry to like learn a lot of those different things. So I think it is something where like if you're putting all that pressure on yourself to like, hey, I need to be in control of everyone around me at all times. And I think I got to that point in Winnipeg where I felt like that. That becomes a heavy burden for you to bear. And at that point, you end up thinking about everyone else besides yourself, and then your play falls off, and then you're not keeping your end of the bargain up in terms of like, hey, your performance and how you're preparing. So that's when I feel it can be a burden.
Yeah, I think what he said to start is like that stood out to me. And I felt the same way in Winnipeg. I think like I always wanted like everyone to be involved in it, and I always felt like I was like hoping or looking for somebody to like join in on that with me. I always felt like, and this is part of being a captain, but like, in a small Canadian market, tough game, like you're the first one in front of the microphone every day. Times are good, like, you deflect any praise, and times are bad, you got to accept it. which is part of the job, and I was totally okay with that. But I always felt like I was, looking around the room and trying to be like, come on, like somebody else, please say something. And I always felt like it ended up being me saying something. And in hindsight, it's like, to your point about like Rod Brindamore, like there was probably a way in which he didn't have to invite anyone. Like he was just inviting, in how he led. Whereas like show, don't tell kind of idea. My teammates, they weren't entering into that conversation willingly. It probably was, mostly because I wasn't doing a good enough job of allowing them to, even though that's all I really wanted the whole time. So that's where like that communication piece where, even if I'm saying, hey, I need you to say something, it's like, well, allow that to happen naturally, I think is more powerful way to go about that.
And there's an interesting dynamic because like I got a client who is a younger guy, and our conversation is like, oh, like, do you feel comfortable speaking up? Like, so there's a tension there between young guys not feeling like, oh, I actually have a voice and like the confidence to say something in those moments. And then and there's no actually, that's not actually communicated between the older guys and the younger guys. So like my encouragement was like, hey man, like go talk to the older guys, say like, hey, like, do you want my help in these moments? Like, do you want me to participate? So it's an interesting dynamic because like, it's something that doesn't get talked about. I'm like, hey, how can we actually lead together? What do we actually need in those moments? Like we need different people to step up. We need different people to own different moments. That is like the beginning of like building that culture, is like having everybody be a part of that.
Yeah. And it's like, not when it's like the team meeting and everyone's in there together being like, hey, come on, what do you got?
Yeah.
That's like a very intimidating position to put a young player in. But like to your point of like, however you do it, making them feel like they're just a part of the team and one of the guys, so that, yeah, if that moment presents itself, they're going to be more likely to step up. And I mean, that's probably, when I was named captain in Winnipeg, like I'll call it the core guys who are, most of them, a lot of them are still there and make up the core of the team now, but those guys are kind of in their early 30s, right? They're like veteran players on the team. When I was named captain, those were like very young guys, and they are quote unquote leaders on the team. So it was challenging to like try to lean on some younger guys to be leaders when it's like, they're kind of still trying to figure it out too.
Yeah, well, and it was funny because I was actually, speaking of those guys, so I was talking to Mark Scheifele and then Josh Morrissey this week, and I told them, hey, we're doing this thing, we're doing this podcast episode, and I asked both, was like, hey, what would you love to hear them talk about? And it was funny because they were personalizing their own experience. I actually asked that question to a couple other captains of the league, and a theme came up, like a very clear theme came up, and it was, oh, I don't know. How do I help the younger guys get better in a way that doesn't shut them down or intimidate them? And in fact, I'm hearing that across a lot of conversations we're having, like, how do we help others grow? And I know you guys both wrestled with that in your career. So I'm curious, like, what advice you might have, or what you or maybe there's times that you tried and it didn't work at all. But like, what comes to mind around that conversation?
I think the first thing is like engaging them in that conversation, like having that conversation. I think understanding like, hey, like what do they envision as their leadership? Like do they actually want to be a leader? What does that look like? The second part of it is like having, there's like, they don't know what they don't know. So they're young players, they don't actually know how to lead yet. So there's a certain level of, patience and I want to say empathy even comes up, or just like, hey, like they actually don't know how to do this. It's almost like the way I deal with my kids, where I'm like, you're frustrated because you're like, this person isn't doing what I want them to do. And then it's like with my kids, I'm like, oh yeah, they don't know how to do that yet. So then I turn into like teacher mode of it kind of shifts how I am showing up in that conversation. And I would say in my younger years, I would just be like, pissed off because they're not acting, or they're not saying, or they're not doing the things that I had in my head what a leader was, instead of actually bridging that like having that conversation and teaching them in that moment.
Yeah, I think like there's this dynamic of older player, young player, right? And older player, I say what to do. Younger player, you do what I tell you to do, right? And that's like certainly how it was like when I came into the league, and it's certainly how I was for a long time in my career too. And like, hey, I've done this, you haven't. I'm going to tell you what to do it, right? And I think if you're able to just get rid of that whole narrative and just be like, hey, listen, we are literally the same. I'm a hockey player, you're a hockey player. We're put on the same sweater. We want the same things. Like, kind of take out sort of like that dynamic and just make it more like equals. And you know, with the understanding that, yeah, okay, I have seen more, and but I'm here to help you. I don't want you to have to go 10 years of learning to get to where I am now. But like, why don't we take a shortcut and I'm going to help you, right? You know, get there faster. So then our team gets there faster, because you need the young guys. You need them to make an impact. You know, in the salary cap era, like, you need guys on the entry level contract to impact your team, right? And they need to do it fast. So that's where like the frustration of like, you know, you've done this 1 year, but I need you to understand everything that I understand. It just doesn't work.
One of the things that I think we're seeing as we work in franchises, both in hockey and other sports too, like the NBA, is just a lack of conversations that are happening. Like, there's a lot of things that could be discussed and resolved, and it doesn't happen. And then guys are making up stories in their heads about their coach or their teammates. And that can create a lot of misalignment in teams. I am curious, like, when you guys played together, how much of that was true, whether it was between teammates or with the organization, coaching staff? And then what did you guys do to navigate? Did you try to solve that, or was it something that seemed elusive when you guys were both leading?
Yeah, for me, it was like a shotgun approach. So it was like it was always like I wanted an impact, and it was to make people play better.
Blake, did you ever see Andrew do that in a way that like didn't work? Like, it was very evident. It's like, oh wow, that was a swing and a miss.
Ladder was really, I thought, calculated. You would probably get a different response if you asked guys about me, you know? But I always experienced Ladder as a leader is like, more calculated than that, you know? Like, it seemed like there was a rhyme or reason behind it. Sure, there was a threshold where he would get into a place where you didn't want to be around him.
Are you telling me more about that, Blake?
the Gary eyes. I mean, everyone that's played with Ladder knows that. I mean, the Winnipeg guy for sure. It's like but it kind of goes back to my original point of it's there's no words that go into that. It's a look, and you know that look, and it's like,
get your head out of your ass.
Correct.
Usually what it is. Yeah. Well, and like that was a big part of my evolution as a leader was like, hey, and I think like I internalized a lot, and I wanted to be very calculated, but I wanted to be sure about it. So I'd wait till I was sure, like, okay, like that needs to be said or that needs to be addressed, instead of just actually getting that out sooner and be like, hey, this is what's going on in my head.
Like, it would build up, and then it would just then Gary's eyes would show up.
Yeah. And then see you later. Then everybody knows. And I can say a lot with my eyes. I can, but for me, it was like, hey, there's actually valuable stuff going on in your head that you're not sharing with the people around you. And that became like something that I needed to, or I wanted to get better at as I move forward with my leadership.
Yeah, there's a whole other part of the conversation I'm excited to have a little bit later around that, around feedback and how it happens and how it doesn't happen. But like, Blake, for you, I know Andrew didn't play under your leadership, but in some ways, Andrew, were there moments when Blake led you when you guys were playing together?
Well, for sure. And I think like there was a little bit of a transition of Blake coming in and worrying about, hey, how do I solidify myself as a strong NHL and star player in the NHL, into like, okay, like I'm here now, like, hey, how can I impact the people around me? And then it became like, oh, I'm going to take charge. Like there was like a noticeable change once his game was solidified, and like, oh, I'm going to take charge and I'm going to be more vocal. I'm going to push people around me. So, and I think at that point we started feeding off each other as like me being quiet, calculated conversations with people on the side to like see how they're doing and what's going on. And Blake being more of the forward facing, like, hey, when something needs to be said, I'm going to address it and I'm going to drive this team with my energy, and my drive.
I remember there was a story I heard earlier from you guys, like Blake, you were trying to get Ladder going in a tunnel.
Yeah, the Ladder story. I don't really remember this one, but
actually, how you lead me is you challenge me. So, which was interesting because it's like, hey, like you want to create this persona where like people respect you, and you know, so so Blake was like the one person at that time. He started to like challenge me.
What was it like being challenged? Like, how would he? What was Blake's? Blake, maybe you remember, but like, what your approach was? What did you do with Ladder?
Well, he just called me out and was like, "Hey, you got to get going." I knew in my head, I was like, this is not going well. Like there's frustration there because my game wasn't where it's at. So we were in the tunnel. He said, I still remember that because like it threw me off in a good way. And my reaction was like, oh, I'm pissed off at that time. And he got the eyes for sure.
Blake, did you not care that the eyes were coming? Like you knew the eyes were coming when you say something like that. Did you just like, oh, I can handle it?
I probably didn't care.
No, and I think at that point, like we had a good, like we had a great relationship. Like one of the things I think, you get to a point, and I think where you're like you can say those things to people, and they're like, I think the one thing about me is like, oh, there's an initial sting with me, but my ability to like internalize and be like, oh no, he's actually right. That's actually why I was pissed off, because he was right, and then move forward. I'm like, okay, cool. Like, but like that built respect with me because I was like, oh, like he was willing to call me out on my bullshit. And, so I just remember that moment and being like, oh, like he's leading right now.
It's like that old like saying or whatever, when like you talk about a coach and it's like, oh, if a coach like stops talking to you or ignores you, that's when like you're cooked kind of thing. Like if they're yelling at you and barking at you all the time, it's like because they see something in you or they like whatever. And like for me as a leader and I could say this with 100% certainty, like anytime, I used that as, to get guys going or whatever, it was 100% always out of love. Like, I see something in you. I love you as a teammate. It was always out of love. There were probably guys, but then it's like you don't say anything, right? So like if I was coming up to you and be like, hey, like let's go, it was 100% out of love. Like, we need you, our team needs you, right? Like that's what it was.
Has that evolved? Like what would your upgrade now be?
I think now, as I got to the, more at the end of my career, I think I wouldn't say anything probably. I think I would more behind the scenes say something. Because you just don't know, right? Like, you don't know what's happening behind the scenes. You don't know what's going on in a person's life. Like, I think the upgrade would be, like, giving the guy a beer after the game, just saying, hey, like, how's everything going? What's up? And if they're like, what do you mean? Nothing. I'm great. Then it could, like, that answer steers the conversation one of two ways. You can, like, show advocacy if they're having a difficult time. But you can also show it if they're just like, hey, I'm good. Then, okay, well, your head's in your ass, so like, let's go, right? But if there's something going on that's affecting their play, then you can open up a new door where like there's like a different form of advocacy going on.
Well, and there's a principle inside of what you guys are talking about, and I think it occurs to me to be fairly natural to both of you, that you understand that in order to, like, in parenting, they talk about, like, you need to build some level of care before you can correct. And I think sometimes you can come in and not have any sort of relationship and say something that can be helpful. But it sounds like on a team, both of you guys understood that. Whether or not the impact of that is always in question. Because, Blake, like, I think about your journey as captain, and then even when we met and we started working on leadership, particularly as well as your game, like, there were some things about your teammates and the dynamics of the team that were really frustrating. And I don't think you had done much thinking about how you might have been impacting others, even though your intentions were full of care. Is that Does that make sense?
What I think that where there was a huge gap was like what I was feeling inside and like how I felt about my teammates and like the care that I was thinking about this like 24 hours a day, you know, like being the captain of the Winnipeg Jets, like how can I be better? How can I make our team better? You know, from the moment I wake up to the moment I go to bed, like everything I do, it's structured around that. But yeah, I think there was definitely, that's where the gap lied of like, you know, am I like, do they feel that way? Right? Like, would they say the same thing? And I think I would say a lot of my teammates would say yes, but there was definitely teammates that would be like, no, this guy's like too much, or he's, you know, cranky all the time, or he's in a bad mood, or you know what I mean. And I own that for sure.
There's a big difference too, man. I'm thinking about this because of being there with you in the process of it. It can be very offensive personally when you're putting so much time and energy thinking about that, and then somebody comes to you and says, you know, the thing you're spending all this time thinking about and putting all this intention, you suck at it. Like it hurts me. You're like, and there's almost a level of, and I think that's often why there's not a lot of conversations going on, because we don't really want to know that the thing we're working so hard at isn't necessarily working.
Like, what was our shortcut? I know you probably, I'm sure you remember, but like, I remember having the conversation about it of like, that kind of saying that thing of like, I'm feeling this way and I feel like I'm doing this thing and I feel like I'm not getting what I want out of it. Like, what am I missing here? And it's like, well, why don't you just ask them, you know? And that was like, some like, I mean, that should be such a simple thing, but like, it was like
yes,
like what?
Like you could go find out. Yeah,
go find out like how you're maybe falling short, and to put yourself out there like that was, I mean, horrifying.
Yes.
The practice of it was like, you know, you say that thing, it's like, okay, yeah, I can ask them, but then it's like when you're, you know, making the phone call, writing the text, approaching somebody face to face, like
yes.
It's like, oh my God, like I'm literally naked in public in front of, you know, like I don't know what's gonna happen next.
Yes, well, and I remember that summer where you started doing that, making those phone calls, having conversation, and learning new things. Like you were, oh wow, this is new information. Just before we go to the next piece of that story, and I'm just curious, Andrew, was there anything that resonated with you in that conversation, like from the way you experienced leadership?
Well, I could speak to like how I experienced Blake, right? And I think like that's when you're talking about, hey, some people will take you differently and like receive things differently, especially, you know, I feel like we're in a new age of athlete where it's not like when I came in the league and Blake came in the league where someone would just sit like yell at you and then all of a sudden it was like, okay, I'm going to work harder and figure this out.
I think it's important to notice, like I think the NHL is transforming right now, and there's still a mentality that is how you motivate and that is how you correct and that is how it works. Like just scream, and that'll get the player to do what you want. And I see a lot of franchises and players, like it's not working anymore and they don't necessarily know how to, what to do next. So anyway, keep going, because that's
so I'd spent enough time with Blake where I remember like when I introduced you guys, and I was like, this guy cares about people and he cares about like his teammates and he cares about all that stuff, and he cares about winning. So like the way I took Blake was like, oh yeah, he cares about me, like he wants to win, like he's driving. I felt that, and that was naturally how I received him. But I could also see the other side of that of like, again, like we're talking about, your intention and if your impact is different than your intention, then you have to reevaluate like, hey, how am I actually communicating what I'm trying to change here, or how am I communicating what I actually want for this person?
We have a saying in our work that communication is communication received, in that like your intention is important, but what happens is even more important, because I could intend to give my wife flowers to show her that I love her, but if I give her flowers and they're flowers that don't occur to her as considerate, or maybe it's the flowers she hates, Like, it doesn't matter my intentions. Her experience is like, well, what the hell? Like, you trying to kill me? Like, you gave me something I was allergic to. Like, there's like kind of that lack of awareness that happens. But
and as a leader, that's a cop out to be like, oh, like I said the right things, I did the right things. They didn't handle their part. It's like, well, okay, like, and that's the next level of leadership is like,
I get to take myself off the hook as a leader because they didn't take it the right way.
You can get through all this so fast by willingness to like A, be vulnerable, but B, just communicate. You know, if you're just willing to like, because every player receives coaching different and every player receives like leadership different. It's the same thing. It's like, you know, as simple as, hey, how do you want me to lead you? What are you looking for from me? You know, like, there you go. And now you're clear. You're not trying to figure it out. It's like you have a template. You know, like each guy, like this, okay, this guy, you know, sometimes he needs a kick in the ass. Okay, this guy can't. And like when I was growing up, I didn't grow up in a hockey household. You know what I mean? Like, so like that kind of, I do believe that like leadership in hockey is different than the other sports. Like I grew up in the U.S. and it was the people I looked up to were football players, baseball players, basketball players. You know, you watch The Last Dance and how Michael Jordan led. Like to me, that was like, that is how you lead. That is it. Like you bust your ass all the time, every practice, every game, and then you can say whatever you want. Right? That's kind of like, that was a template.
Like you earned the right to be an asshole.
You earn the right to say the thing that needed to be said. And if you think that that's being an asshole, then call me an asshole. But that's where I was okay, you know, being the guy that had to say the thing that maybe nobody wanted to say, because I was like, I'm backing it up every day. I believe, you know, whether I was or wasn't. Like that was like how I came into that.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting distinction too, because like you think about, I think about the people who've made the biggest difference in my life and growth, and they have had to say difficult things to me. And even in that moment, it's hurt, it's stung. And even if in that moment I didn't think they cared about me, like I think that's developing a mind that's really coachable and open. And there are moments when I've been like that, and moments I haven't been like that. But when it's from somebody, like if Blake or Andrew, either of you came to me and said something that you saw that I could grow in and improve in, I know there's care in you, and that creates a totally different experience, even if it's really, really tough to hear. But I want to be a person, I'm thinking about myself for a second, I want to become a person who could take that even from somebody who doesn't care about me. Like I will learn from everything. So I want to, Blake, just so in that summer you went out. This is what's so ironic about the timing, because you're smiling too, because we know where this is going, right? You go out, you start having conversations and really getting, I would say, like getting an accurate picture of your impact, a more accurate picture of your impact. And then a new coaching staff comes in and you get told you're not the captain anymore. Which I think could give any person a lot of ammunition emotionally to shut down, or to essentially like, well, screw this leadership thing. Like, because you're in the midst of getting difficult feedback, and then that's almost another piece of feedback or another thing that happened. So I am curious, like, what I know because I was there, but like what was that like, and what did you end up doing with those conversations, and like where did that go?
I just think it's important for context. Like, you know, you and I had started working, you know, a year and change before that it all happened. And yeah, like when Ladder introduced us, you know, the reason that you and I started working together was some of the challenges I was going through, you know, both with like the leadership, the hockey thing, but also just personally, you know, from, you know, mental standpoint, and just my, you know, the anxiety sort of piece. And that is what led me to you, you know, was like how I was just struggling. And working with you that year, it like, I'm not saying it made things worse, but it was not like we snapped our fingers and was like, okay, all better,
all fixed.
It was like that was the worst year for a lot of reasons for me. You know, in the worst year in the sense of like, you know, having panic attacks before every game. Like just, I was in a really bad place, and I became somebody who I was not proud of. So then you fast forward to the summer where we're starting to like, you know, kind of make progress and entering that next season of like, you know, I'm in a way better place, like from a like health standpoint, leadership standpoint. Like I'm on a really good trajectory. And then the rug gets pulled underneath, and, oh, by the way, you're not the captain anymore.
And just because it keeps going, the thing that you just said that I don't want to miss is like, you were going through a lot of challenges privately and quietly, and even things that you hadn't told me yet. And then once you started talking about it, and then finding the resources to support yourself and getting to know your anxieties, and I could see the growth, and there was like almost this building of excitement and energy around, okay. And then the summer happened, and then all of a sudden the position shifts. So keep going.
For sure, my first instinct was to take the bait with what you just, you know, of being the victim. I just got screwed. All these different things. And because of the previous, call it, year and a half working together, I was able to slow all that down and just like the question I asked myself, you know, pretty quickly after all that happened was like, when my career is over with, when all this is said and done, my kids look back on this, like, what will I be proud of? Like when I look in the rearview mirror, how I handle this, that's going to dictate like whether or not I'm proud of this moment or ashamed of it. You know what I mean? And were you ever a leader if you could only lead when times were good? Because you get named captain, there's this honeymoon phase. You're the best. You're the best. Our team got really good. We were knocking on the door of being like a Stanley Cup team. Everything was really good for a few years. I was like, man, this is like, maybe I am this great, like captain.
Leadership feels so easy.
I thought this isn't so hard. And I remember when it started kind of going the other way, and talking to him one day, and he was like, "You're finally welcome. You're finally a leader. You know what it's like now. This is leadership." So that always stood out to me. So like, I'm eternally grateful that you and I that you came into my life when you did, and we went through all that stuff together, because when like the most challenging moment of my career and life probably at that time happened, you know, I was equipped with tools to handle it in a way that I could be proud of.
Yeah, it was funny. I think we even talked about it. Like, and Andrew has his own version of this story. It's all, we all do. I think they're in many ways, that year before that happened, we didn't realize we were preparing for a moment like that, but it happens to all of us. There's the chaos of the circumstances of losing something, and I'm curious, and Andrew, this is a bit of a sideways question, but like you knew Blake, and you were watching Blake from afar go through this. And I'm actually I didn't plan on asking you this question, but what was it like watching Blake go through this, and what were you feeling and thinking as a guy who knows the team, knows guys there, knows Blake? What was going on for you?
Yeah, I think I was like knowing Blake and then knowing what he wanted for that organization, for the team, like understanding. I didn't know a whole lot about what he was going through, but obviously I knew he was working with you, and that was starting to shift for him, of like, hey, understanding his impact on others, and like growing, like I knew he was working at it. So I was pissed off. Because I'm like, oh, like you've had this person in your organization who is actively working to like, hey, how do I become a better leader for this group? And then he didn't even get the chance to implement that.
Blake, is that true? Did you not get a chance?
Well, I think that's like, that's not what ladder meant, but
I know it's not.
You're being an asshole, Dan. But
yeah,
but yeah, the answer is like sort of what I said before. Like, do you need to have a letter on your sweater to show up?
Yeah, and like again, that's the easy thing to say. Like that's and we all know it's the right answer. It's the easy thing to say. It's so hard to do, and it's so different than any other industry in the entire world. Like if you're a CEO of a company and you're like, You don't get, oh, okay, now we're going to put you out as like a
VP.
Yeah, you're going to be a VP now. Like, no, you go somewhere else. So there's a certain level of like embarrassment and shame that you're putting someone through in that moment. That is, and I know other guys in the league have gone through the same thing. So you're not alone there. But like, it takes a certain amount of character to handle that situation properly. And so that's why I was like, watching you go through that, man, like I was proud of like, hey, how you handled that. And as a friend, I got to be pissed off for you behind the scenes. And I knew it was like, you would come out of that. Like, what I love about hard times is like that's what helps create our character. So like, I also was like, oh, like this is going to be a great moment for Blake as well. Cause I knew coming out the other side of it that you would be even that much better of a leader and person, and there would be a lot of growth through those moments.
Yeah, I'm curious, Blake, like that year, what did you learn about yourself in that year when you didn't have a letter and you were in that room?
I mean, the words you said were true, ladder. Like, embarrassed probably doesn't do justice how I felt. Like, I remember the first time I went out for like our first game of the season and I didn't have the thing on my the C on my jersey anymore, and like that was a bad feeling. Like I felt humiliated. I felt like everyone was staring at me. Like it wasn't easy. Like I'm not gonna tell you it was easy. Like it was just like, okay, I asked myself the question and I handled it this way, and smooth sailing. Like no, it was every day. Honestly, was hard. Like every day was hard. Because what I felt and wanted for that team and organization did change.
Yeah, I just want to slow down though, because like that to me speaks volumes to the character that you have. Because I think for others that might be the opposite. It's like, well, I hope this place burns to the ground, and that was I never got that from you talking to you about Winnipeg and the team and what you wanted for them and the group even when you're in it. So I just want to vouch for that as you say it, because that is true.
Well, and like, I'll double down on like, hey, it's not, as you're going through something like this, and like, I'll speak from my experiences, like it's not like you just flip a switch and you're just going to like, hey, you're going to feel good. Like it's a constant like reevaluation of like, hey, what am I committed to for this group, for myself, for my family? It's a constant thing that you're going back to over and over again. And you're going to have days where you feel like shit and you're like, that embarrassment comes back up, or that they're going to be tough days. And it's like, I feel like the skill of coming back to, what am I committed to and who do I want to be in this moment is like, that is the work. You doing the work over and over again.
It wasn't every day, but it was a lot. I mean, it was probably weekly of like re-engaging that conversation of, okay, like I'm not showing up how I want to show up today. So how do I want to show up? And being like really like painfully intentional about that every day, even if I was faking it. Because even if I was faking it, how I showed up, by the end of the day, by the end of the game, by the end of whatever that day brought, like I was who I wanted to be.
Yeah, it went from feeling like it wasn't authentic to feeling like, oh, it's here now. Yeah, and there's something about, it's funny how much time and energy athletes put into their bodies and their physical preparation. And what I saw in that season for you, Blake, was incredible mental diligence. Like, and you use that stubborn, powerful presence that you have to be a dog with a bone with something. And actually, that's the one thing that I really experienced in both you guys while you guys were both playing. Like, you guys were both tenacious. You were tenacious people. And applying that to this conversation was pretty cool to see, because we could see the impact that Andrew, we've done an episode before, and people want to listen to Andrew's story. There's a detailed version of it. But of going to the minors and like not being where you want to be, and what does it look like to show up and continue to show up and create value there and create a life. And because I think sometimes guys kind of fold their hands and go, well, I guess it's over and I'm going to sit here and protest, or I'm going to be angry at the situation, not realizing there's still value here. I can still do something with what I have.
I'm glad you opened that door for me, because like having watched, I'm sure we'll touch on this at some point too, but having watched Ladder get to 1,000 games and the journey to get there, I used that a ton that year. I used that a ton, like just mentally, like, you know, a guy who I've looked up to, a guy who I've played with, a guy who has meant a lot to me, like watching him, you know, I didn't get sent out to the minors. You know what I'm saying? Like I don't know what that feels like. Like, so, you know, there was an element of like, quit feeling bad for yourself, you know, quit feeling sorry for yourself.
Like a perspective shift when you start thinking.
Yeah, for sure. Like using Ladder's, you know, determination to get what he wanted out of that shitty situation was like gold for me. So I just want to point that out while you open that door, because I don't know if I've ever told Ladder that.
You know, it's funny, Andrew. I remember, how many games did you have to go when you re-injured your knee?
Dan and I were together at dinner when it happened.
That's right. I forgot about that. Yes.
We were in Calgary when I was probably telling one of my incredible stories, and you had this like thick look on your face, and you're like, "Oh no!" And I was like, "What?" And then I think Brandy had just texted you.
And I remember that the thing that floored me about that moment was you were telling me about something that some other family that had gone through something really hard or found out their kid had cancer or something. And what was blowing my mind in that moment, and it was such a testament to I think both a tactic but also the character. You were searching for perspective. You were going, hey, this sucks, and I feel this emotion and pain, and there's a lot worse things that are happening right now, and it's easy to forget that, and like, yes, feel those feelings, and let's not deny them. But I was actually so inspired and impressed with your ability to feel what you're feeling, but also remember that there's a bigger story going on and there's other things going on. And it's interesting that you echo that, Blake, and you're saying of what Andrew's moments in career created for you and creating more perspective for you.
Yeah, I think I've always looked up to Ladder like that. And I think even when we played together, you know, I asked a lot out of myself because I know Ladder asks a lot of himself every day, and I wanted to, like, in a way, make him proud of like how I was like competing every day. Like, hey, if I can kind of like check that box from him, then like I know I've done a good job. And so like in that moment, I almost felt the same way of you know, this guy like literally wouldn't take a no, would not be denied. So like I'm gonna use a little bit of that.
It's easy to lose sight of like the impact you're having on others while you're going through something tough.
I'm really glad you went there, because I think a lot of leaders even don't recognize that as being a thing that's happening. Like,
yeah, and I'm having that, like, I'm like, oh, I didn't realize that I was impacting someone from even afar, of like, hey, like how I was handling a situation. And I'm sure I had that impact on people in the organization that I was around, and as I was going through what I was going through in Long Island, I'm sure Blake had that same thing happening in I know he did, because I heard from other people in Winnipeg of like, oh, like how he's handling this situation is exceptional, and there's a compound effect on like what that does for the people around you in the organization and around the league, to draw from someone else's experience and someone else's leadership going through a tough time.
And I'm thinking about young captains. I want to send this is a little selfish, but one of the reasons I wanted to do this episode so badly was I wanted our young captains or guys who are currently playing to listen to two guys who've done it, talk about it. And one of the things I think that gets missed is that I heard this, I can't remember where I heard this, but this idea that your words and your presence carry 10,000 pounds, not in a negative way. It can be negative depending on what direction you're going. But I was talking to one of your teammates, Blake, yesterday, and he was telling me just how much impact your belief in him had, and how it really opened up the door for him to think he could be an elite player in the league, and he's become an elite player in the league. And it's interesting how even when you're going through something hard and difficult, like even that season, Blake, where you're playing with that team, with the Jets, and you're not the captain, still the guys, the way they spoke about you, the way they Yeah, and of course there's gaps and there's lots of areas of improvement, and you had bad days, but there was a respect or an honoring, like, oh wow, like he's still showing up, he's still giving his all, he's not quitting, and that teaches people something around you. So it's not really a question in there, but it's just something I was observing. But I do think leaders, and maybe this is, I'm thinking about even your own journeys. Were there moments in your life when somebody said something, a captain or a leader, and it maybe now on hindsight, maybe it wasn't a big deal to that leader, but it meant a huge amount to you and they didn't realize the impact? Or did you experience people who understood the impact that they were having?
I think even just like little things like, and I don't think you'd ever remember this, but when I got traded from Boston to Atlanta, and Zdeno Chara texted me and he was just like, good luck, all the best, and like you're going to be something to the effect of like an elite player in this league one day. And to me, it was like, well, he thinks of me that way? Because like, like being his teammate, I was like, oh, I didn't know he thought of me that way. So it was just like little nuggets like that, along the way where, yeah, so that's like just like adding gas to a fire, when you get somebody you look up to showing you, even if it, like to them, it's nothing. It's a quick text, takes 5 seconds to even think about it. It's like, oh my God, that means the world to me. So I, all throughout my, time as captain at Winnipeg, I know that's something I always tried to like, help guys with, especially young guys, of just, kind of reminding them like, hey, you're going to be a stud. Don't forget that.
I would say I'd similar, like I got to sit down in the minors early on in my first year. And as I was walking out of the rink, Rod Brindamore grabbed me and just had a conversation with me and was like, hey, like, it was really refocusing of like, hey man, like you have an opportunity to go down and play lots and have fun and get better. Right. And I was like angry and like, oh, like, I didn't want to go down and play.
This isn't an opportunity.
Yeah. Right. I'm like, did you see the pay difference? But it was like a centering. So like, that's something I took with me beyond that in terms of like Blake said, then like that's something I passed on to the next teams that I was on with younger guys that were going through something very similar, where in that moment you're feeling like this big devastating blow and it's actually not, it's just a little bump in the road. And it's like, hey, cool. Like we'll see you soon. Right. So it is some of those just little conversations and then taking the time to actually have those conversations and let people know you're thinking about them and like giving them some guidance in those moments is super impactful.
The word that's coming up for me as you guys are talking about it is like courage. Like leadership, especially when it's not going well, requires a lot of commitment to courage and to being willing to fall on your face, to go again, to make a mistake in how you're communicating and own it. And I've seen both you guys do that. And also fail at that. Me too. Like, it's just what it means to lead. And what's funny with Andrew is, going from leading in a certain context in the NHL, now he has a front row seat of my leadership, and he challenges me, and he sees things and he points them out, and I'm like, yeah, you're right. Like there's like but I know that's the only way to get better as a leader. And it is interesting even in sports, right? Like there's the guys want to practice what they feel good doing as opposed to stepping into the gaps and things they're not good at. But that's where all the growth is going to be found. So there's a bunch of young captains listening to this right now, and they're new. They're new to the job. Maybe they've been in it for a year or a couple of years. There's a few guys that personally who've just recently been named captains that we work with, and they're going to lead in their own way. But I'm curious, like, what advice or what learnings that we already haven't talked about, and it could be something trivial or funny. Do you think for this time in the NHL and where the NHL is going, leaders need to understand? Leaders need to begin to buy into in maybe a new way, because things are evolving and changing with younger players and organizations.
Yeah, I think the first thing that comes to mind for me is like there's going to be some natural leadership skills that flow out of you that like those are going to be your guardrails. So like it's like and you can continue to go to the well where it's like, oh, I'm just the guy that like leads by example and shows up and works hard every day, right? or I'm the guy that like speaks when I'm supposed to, like when something needs to be said. And it's like, hey, like that's one aspect of your leadership. So like, are you looking at all the different aspects of your leadership and hey, where else can you grow? Like what conversations are you not having? Where are you actually not being a great example for your teammates? When are you not speaking up when you know that there's something that needs to be said or something that you want to say? And even like improving, like, hey, how do I improve my communication? Like, what does that look like? How do I want to articulate, to what we were talking about before, that, hey, like I care about you and like, what kind of player do you want to be for this team? Like, is that happening right now? Right. So I think there's a bunch of different ways, but it's really looking at like, hey, how am I leading? And then how am I not leading right now? Because I think it's easy to look at like the how I'm leading. It's harder to look at the other side of that and be like, oh, like, yeah, maybe I'm not doing those things. And because it exposes some gaps, and that's really where that gold is.
No, I mean, I would say like first and foremost, communication. And people think that when you say communication, it's only what you're saying. There's so much more that goes into communicating. It's a lot of times it's what you're not saying, as you both know.
Yeah.
Like, what are you not saying? And are you not saying it because, for a valid reason? And maybe this is, not warranted right now, or are you withholding it because you're scared to have that conversation?
Yeah. And usually I can.
Usually, yeah. And then another big one, as far as communication is like how you show up, like your energy you bring, your body language. And that's one that I really, really struggled with as a leader because, there's a lot of times, we had 3 kids under the age of 5 and, I wanted to be a good husband and a good dad, and we'd play a game and, I'd go home and Sam hasn't slept in 10 days. And so I'm home. I'm like, you know what? I'm going to wake up with the kid at 6 a.m. and I've gotten 4 hours of sleep, but I still got to go to practice. And now I'm going to practice like cook like that. Yeah. And my teammates look at me like, wow, he's in a bad mood today. And it's like, no, I'm actually just, I'm exhausted. And I always felt like never really got any slack on that because it was just like, that's how I showed up, So it was like, he's grumpy. And really how I was feeling was I'm literally just trying to get through this practice so I can go home and like take a nap. Like I'm fried right now. And then the second thing on that, I would say is and we touched on it earlier, but just like kind of losing your ego a bit, you like be here, like be on level playing surface with everyone else, whether it's a young player or an old player, like invite young players to, do things, get to know them, make them feel like you care about who they are, not for how many goals they could potentially score, but like, where they come from, where their family is, do they have a girlfriend, like all those little things where now, fast forward 2 months when I need to have a difficult conversation, that it's because I care about you, not because I want something from you.
Yeah. And you know who you're talking to.
Exactly. And to that other point of like communicating where, I know how to lead you now, I know that kicking the ass doesn't work for this guy. So I gotta love him up a little bit and find out what's going on behind the scenes. I think those little things just take out some of that like internal dialogue of, why are they responding to what I'm doing, or, what's this guy thinking? Just ask him, like just get cut through it. Just approach him, ask him, be approachable.
I think about players who struggle with ego. Do you think, I don't know what the answer to this is, so I'm curious what you guys think. Do you think that winning teams have less ego in the room? Or do you think they need that?
No, I think you need ego. But then you also need people who are willing to have the courage to check other people's egos. So, hey, there's moments where that ego can be a powerful thing. And there are moments when, hey, that's going to get in your way and in your team's way of winning. So it's like, hey, do you have the ability to understand if it's a resourceful time to step into that ego or if it's not? And even getting to like the feed, like as a leader, like how often are you asking for feedback? So like what Blake did was super courageous. And I make up there's a lot of people not willing to do that. So there is courage involved in showing and leading by example in a way that like, hey, like I'm open to receiving criticism. I'm open to receiving feedback because I know that that's going to actually help me get better. And in turn, the rest of the group is going to get better.
Yeah. I just think that it's naive to assume that because a team won a championship, there aren't egos in the room. Like we're all like every guy. I mean, every person has an ego, but every guy in a professional sports locker room carries a big ego. You have to be there. Everyone does. I think where the teams that are really good is the leadership is able to kind of direct these egos, right? Direct them in a resourceful way, in a resourceful direction, so that it's not, it's advancing the team. It's not like putting brakes on it. I think that's probably like the juggling act is like the acknowledgement of every guy in this room has got a big ego, and that's why they're here. So how do we direct that? How do we put that in the right spots so that we're moving kind of together in the same direction?
Yeah, and this is a connected question, and then this is how we'll land the plane. I think about the emotion in the game and moments in the game when competitiveness flares and emotions get high. What do people who are watching who've never played not understand about the emotion of the game itself? And because it's funny, like I watch games where a guy gets fired up and he does something, but it also helps his game, and it's like it gets judged. And like there's like an interesting interplay between like where the line is in terms of getting emotional and getting overly emotional. And you both are emotional guys, like and Blake, probably I would suggest you're more outwardly emotional, and Andrew's a little more inwardly emotional in terms of your presentation. But I am curious, like, what do people not understand about that, and what it means to get yourself up to the place you need to perform really well?
Yeah, I mean, for me, that is the hardest part about playing professional sports and hockey in general, because, and I think that's what makes hockey one of the hardest sports to play is the emotional level you need to get to 82 times a year. Right? It's not like football where you're playing once a week. Like I always say that, like you put me in a football game, like I'll get ramped up to play once a week. Like I'll be running through a wall. Like I can do that. Now when you get into a hotel at 3, 4 in the morning, you got to get up and play the next day, and you're emotionally like you got to get your energy back up to that level. And for me, it was like, hey, when I played my best when I was pissed off and like I wanted to hurt people on the ice. Not that I actually wanted to hurt them, but like that mentally, that's where I had to get to. Like I was going through people,
like an intensity,
and there's a certain level, a certain intensity I had to get to day in, day out, and that has that drains you in between, right? So it's like even when like thinking about coaches, and a lot of times it's like systematic and work ethic, and it's like, no, dude, like where's everybody energy at? And I thought like we both played for Paul Maurice, and like his gift is like helping people get their energy up, helping them get excited to play, helping them like. And he was exceptional at that. And it was amazing seeing what that did for that group day in, day out, and just how much the level of play raised because of like the excitement to play and the intensity that we were able to get to from his leadership and his like inspiration before games, in between games.
That's nail on the head. It's and that's where me as an emotional person, like that was my battery every game, was like tapping into the emotion. And, so what was really challenging for me as a leader was like after the game, you got to dial that down and talk to the media in a way that's like, respectful. And like, I'm like a 10 out of 10 on the emotion scale, like for the last 3 hours. Now I just got to like, I can't.
There's some very famous clips of you having moments like that. Yeah,
I know. And I think, I don't think, that's where some of the media stuff in Winnipeg, they probably don't like me very much, but it was never personal. And an hour after every game, like I could have a great conversation, even if I had the worst game of my life. It's just like 10 minutes after, I'm still here.
You're just like, ugh, yeah,
I'm still, I'm just, I can't come down that fast. So, and that's where I was getting towards the end of my career, you know, like tapping into that resource, like 82 times a year, 10, 11, 12. It's like, you know, my body, can I still go play a hockey game? Hell yeah. Like I could still play. It's just like the emotional get up 82 times is like, I don't want to do that. Right. Like that's kind of where you get to, where it's just like, there's only so much gas in the tank for that. So, no, I think that's a great point by Louder.
So like another point just to add to that is like everyone wears their emotion differently. So it's like, what is actually healthy for you as an athlete or an individual is like, for me, like I would carry that all inside and to the point where it would just like explode.
Yeah, before we met, you'd not really had a space to really decompress much of that.
Yeah, so I had to find different ways to like get that out and really like refresh myself in between games, especially the latter part of my career. And Blake might have a different experience, like he said, like where he's always like wearing his emotion on the outside, and that has a toll on you, and I'm sure it has a toll on the people around you as well. So like starting to understand the impact of all that on yourself, on others is super valuable.
Yeah, guys, we could probably talk for another 2 hours. I am so thankful for both of you and your time, and deeply grateful for just the chance to spend time with you in these spaces, to be a part of your lives. And thank you for sharing a part of your lives and this part of your life with anyone listening right now. And hopefully it's hugely resourceful to you if you're listening and you're a leader and you're an athlete, or if you're just a leader and not an athlete, or if you're an athlete leader, whatever. We're really excited to spend time together. So thanks, Blake. Thanks, Andrew, for giving us some of your time, and maybe we'll do it again.
Thanks, guys.
Sounds good, pal. Thanks, man.
All right, we have a few more things to let you know about before we go. First, podcast reviews really help us serve more people. So if this podcast is helpful for you, we'd love your help to get it into as many leaders' hands as possible. Please leave us a review, even if it's not 5 stars. And if you really want to go the extra mile, let us know what you'd like to hear more of, or what you think we could do better to serve you and the people you care about. Okay, second, we have more resources for you online, and they're all free. We have free assessments, educational videos, articles from sources like Fast Company, written by our coaches and clients, all designed to help you use our tools in your everyday life and leadership. To dive into the free treasure trove of goodies we have for you, go to novus.global and then click on resources. Some of you have been listening for a while, and you haven't yet taken that next step to hire a coach. This is your time. I can't tell you how often I've heard from clients around the world that they wish they would have talked to us sooner. If you have a sense that you're capable of more, we would be thrilled to explore what coaching could do for you and those you influence. Simply email us at begin@novus.global or click the link in the show notes. You also might be listening to this thinking, maybe you want to be a coach, or maybe you already are and you have a vision to build a 6 or 7 figure practice coaching people you love in a way that brings life to you and your clients. Well, that's why we created the Meta Performance Institute for Coaching. It is an in-depth coaching apprenticeship designed to help you create the coaching practice of your dreams. The first step in exploring that is simple. Just go to www.mp, as in Meta Performance, .institute. There we have free assessments to help you see what kind of training you need to create the coaching practice the way our coaches do at Novus Global. Finally, this show is produced by Rainbow Creative with Matthew Jones as executive producer, Steven Selnick as producer, and Rob Johnson as audio editor and engineer. We love working with this team. Find out more about how to create a podcast for you and your business at rainbowcreative.co. Thank you so much for listening. We love making these for you. And remember, dare to go beyond high performance.